Welcome to the story of Jacob and Rachel. Genesis 29, then Jacob continued on his journey. If we know the background, we know that he had deceived his father in order to take the birthright from his brother Esau. And so he's fleeing. He's fleeing from Esau, continuing on his journey, and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the field with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was very large. So once again, we have this literary motif, a story element of a well involved, something important, something having to do with family and procreation is going to take place. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they replied. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Well, yes, we know him," they answered. Then Jacob asked them, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said. "And here comes his daughter Rachel, with the sheep." Shades of Rebecca. Another literary motif. Is it just coincidence that the same kind of story elements appear over and over? That's a question in itself that biblical scholars ask with regard to the composition of this text. Could there be even more than one author that's involved here, that's repeating stories that we find elsewhere? That's another issue. Of course, we're about romantic love in the text. "Look," he said, "the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep, take care of them, or take them back to pasture." Again, the same story elements as in the Rebecca narrative. "We can't," they replied, "until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep." While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel, began to weep out loud. Jacob kissed Rachel. Thank you, monkeys. Are these the elements here of a real love story? Is this a Hollywood moment? Is it love at first sight? Is this romantic love in the Bible? Do you believe? Do you believe in love? And is this it? Why the weeping? Maybe he knows that she is the one. It's a sign. But nowhere does it say that Rachel loved him. The whole thing is a bit one-sided, do you think? It's his lust and erotic craving for her. Doesn't seem to care whether she loves him or not. Is she just chattel? Is that the way women are depicted in the biblical text? Again, all this is open to debate. It's controversial. How patriarchal is the society? How are women treated? Is there such a thing as romantic love? These are all debate points, and they need to be debated strongly on both sides. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and the son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father. Again, it's the males in the society who seem to be predominant in terms of all of the official transactions. Maybe the woman rules the roost. Maybe she's the ancient Yiddish mama, but the papa makes the transactions and the official decisions. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him. and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you're a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Now, the plot thickens. Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel, Rachel. I'm sure they looked just like this. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel was lovely in form and beautiful. She had a good figure, good body. Is that really what it's all about? Is that what matters? The figure. Forget compatibility, things you might have in common, IQ, and so on. It's about the eyes, isn't it? Jacob was in love with Rachel, with a little help from Legoland. We know exactly what it was like. And said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel." At last, explicit mention of love, romantic love in the Bible. We've found it. And it sets up a classic story pattern. The protagonist of the story wants something. That something is denied for some reason. It's classic all over literature. The protagonist has to go through many perils, trials, tribulations, learning experiences before he finally attains the thing that he wants. Laban said, "It's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." So here he is bargaining over her again as though she's so much chattel. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. That's what love will do, right? On the one hand, how lovely, how romantic. Isn't this a lovely story? On the other hand, love is pretty darn blind, isn't it? At least sometimes. There just might have been a better way to spend 7 years, do you think? Do you suppose there's even a subtle undertext about romantic love through the story? That romantic love can, in fact, blind people. They care about nothing else. They ignore even good sense, common sense. Is the Bible trying to hint at that message as well? As if to say, beware of falling in love just through what your eyes see? Once more, the Bible doesn't mince words. It is so very precise, and it tells you only the bare bones of what you need to know. Everything else, the reader is supposed to fill in, jump into the narrative, and become a part of it. How different from modern storytelling. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to lie with her." Pretty direct, isn't he? Maybe vulgar. Of course, he hadn't had sexual relations for 7 years. He must have been fairly desperate by now. "I want to lie with her." So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. A big mazal tov, right? A big congratulatory feast. And at last, a nice Jewish wedding. Had to have been some party. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and gave her to Jacob, and Jacob lay with her. Ooh, the deceit. Jacob had been deceitful himself. Now some deceit comes to him. He gets Leah instead. But all the focus is on Jacob. Doesn't say anything about Rachel and or Leah, what they're feeling. Is this a sexist text? Just from the man's viewpoint? Is that what we have here? A protagonist who's so drunk he can't tell one woman from another? What is this, Purim? Or maybe, again, it's a subtle commentary about males. it's all a question of how we evaluate it, how we interpret the text, and there are a wide variety of opinions, as there ought to be. And Laban gave his servant girl Zilpah to his daughter as her maidservant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why, you deceived me." Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one." So here's Laban, consummate businessman, right? Cares not at all for the feelings of his daughters. He wants Jacob's continued labor. It's good business, right? Finish this daughter's bridal week. Then we will give you the younger one also, in return for another 7 years of work. And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and Laban gave him his daughter Rachel, to be his wife. But is the text again telling us something about romantic love? Jacob's love is a bit blind. There's no bargaining here. He just accepts and agrees to another 7 years. Either it's the deepest love in the universe, or he's just acting stupid. 7 more years. 7. What is this now? 14 total. And Laban gave his servant girl Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maidservant. Jacob lay with Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. Once more, a man can have as many women as he wants, but the woman must be strictly monogamous. Ooh. But one of the inequities of polygamy, inequalities, is that often one is loved more than the other. And so the dysfunctionality of this family just continues. On the one hand, the Bible allows multiple wives, no question about it. It's legal. But on the other hand, is there a subtle warning about the dangers almost inherent in polygamy? Is that a possibility? And how much of a possibility? All these questions, issues, and layers of issues in the text. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Ooh, once more, the barrenness motif. As with Sarah, as with Rebecca, somehow the deity desires to right the inherent inequity of polygamy as a system. And so the one who was not loved is the one with child. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." After all of this love that's been showered on her, now it seems to dissolve into accusation. It's your fault. Give me children or I'll die. But of course, children are so valued in ancient society. More, arguably, way more than they should be to produce this kind of response. Jacob became angry with her and said, "Am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children?" What a switch. After 14 years of devoted labor for the love of his life, kept you from having children. It dissolves into mutual accusation. Is this part of the subtle subtext? It may start romantically. You'll do anything to attain the other person. Even senseless things, agreeing to ridiculous demands. But then what happens? Dissolves into mutual accusation. Where's this great romantic love? Then she said, "Here is Bilhah, my maidservant, sleep with her, so that she can bear children for me, and that through her I too can build a family. And it's interesting when we look at the actual text in Hebrew. You don't have to read Hebrew, but we've got to examine it anyway. Vatomer, and she said, Hine amati Bilha. Here is my maidservant Bilha. Boelea, come into her. V'teled al birkai, and she will bear on my knees. Literally is what it says. The English translates it, she can bear children for me. She will deliver, she will bear, v'teled al birkai, on my knees. V'ibane gam anochi mimena, and I will build also through her, build a family, is the implication. Let's notice something Carol Meyer points out in her text, Carol Meyer's Discovering Eve, where she writes, for example, Genesis 33, which is one of the few passages that gives any information about ancient practices related to the actual birth process, describes Rachel asking Bilhah to bear, i.e. to give birth, on her knees. Exodus 1:19 gives the impression that Israelite women, unlike Egyptian women, had easy deliveries, and that they gave birth before midwives could get to them. Interesting little tidbits to add. But what happened to all this great love? Now she just gives him another woman. Does it sound like the whole thing is over, this whole relationship? We have to question it, just like we questioned Abraham and Sarah. Same motif as the Sarah story. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her. And why doesn't Jacob refuse and proclaim his love for her? He just sheepishly goes along, like arguably another wimp. And she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel said, God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son. Because of this, she named him Dan. Dan in Hebrew means judge or judgment. God has judged and vindicated. And that's the idea. All the names have precise meanings. But some vindication. Her husband has a child by her maidservant. Maybe she should be on some talk show. Maybe the old Jenny Jones show used to have all that kind of thing. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. What once is not enough? Then Rachel said, I have given a great struggle. I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won. So she named him Naphtali. Struggle among siblings is another motif that's all over the text, just as we found with Jacob and Esau. During wheat harvest, we're told, Reuben went out to the fields and found some mandrake plants, which he brought to his mother, Leah. Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take away my son's mandrakes too? Very well, Rachel said. He can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. Mandrakes? Such a deal. It's all about mandrakes. And what's the significance of mandrakes? Do they have some symbolic meaning in the text? That's something worth exploring. Something about mandrakes having to do with family, marriage, offspring. Is it a symbol? So when Jacob came in from the fields that evening, Leah went out to meet him. You must sleep with me, she said. I have hired you as my son, with my son's mandrakes. So she slept with her that night. God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a fifth son. Then Leah said, God has rewarded me for giving my maidservant to my husband. So she named him Issachar. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and opened her womb. The word remember in Hebrew also means favor, favored. For example, in the story of Noah and the flood, it says God remembered Noah. Does that mean he had forgotten about Noah, where Noah was? No, it means he favored him. God favored Rachel, just as with Sarah and Rebekah. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. She named him Joseph and said, may the Lord add to me another son. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me on my way so I can go back to my own homeland. Then Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. It seems like they know that they're not anything but basically chattel. And so they initiate a little proto-feminist revolt. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children, so do whatever God has told you. Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. When Jacob had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. It's like, hey, I deserve this. We've got it coming to us. So, yeah, we'll just take them. Take the household gods, the household idols, which were really pretty popular across the ancient Near East. Even the Israelites had idols. Even if they had proclaimed belief in a single deity, never you mind, the idols are fashionable. It's like little pieces of furniture. And we find them in the Israel Museum of Jerusalem to this day. Little idols that were found in the archaeology among ancient Israelite homes. So the text is being realistic here. Then they moved on from Bethel. While they were still some distance from Ephrat, Rachel began to give birth and had great difficulty. As she was having great difficulty in childbirth, the midwife said to her, don't be afraid, for you have another son. As she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named her son Ben-Oni. Again, the names have significance. Oni is my grief, the son of my grief, my pain, my travail. But his father named him Binyamin, or Benjamin, son of the right hand. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrat, that is Bethlehem. Bethlehem is going to appear prominently again in the biblical text, as we'll discover. Over her tomb, Jacob set up a pillar, and to this day, that pillar marks Rachel's tomb. And so it does. One can visit it even today in the land of Israel. Rachel's tomb, at least traditionally, Rachel's tomb is still there. In death, Jacob reveres Rachel's memory and favors her children, wouldn't you know, more than all the others. And so the dysfunctionality of this ancient Simpson family just keeps going on. So let it be written. So let it be done.